welcome to Sherlock Mondays, everyone. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we're going on a biblioventure through the stories of Sherlock Holmes. This is episode 20, The Adventure of the Stockbroker's Clerk. Sounds ominous. It doesn't, but then it will become grim. And joining me as co-host is Curtis Armstrong. Hi, Curtis.
Hi, Ed. How are you doing?
I am great and happy to have you back so soon.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
And what we do here on Sherlock Mondays, everyone, is deduce, decipher, dissect Arthur Conan Doyle's stories about the world's first consulting detective, Sherlock Holmes, and his able assistant, Dr. John Watson, in a kind of conversational annotation. If you are watching live right now, I invite you to please like and subscribe to this channel and have fun in the live chat. If you're watching the recording, I also ask you to please like and subscribe. Sherlock Mondays is also an audio podcast, and thank you to all of our podcast listeners. And please consider making a donation to the Rosenbach. If you've already donated or joined as a member, thank you so much. That's how we get to do this show for free, because of your support for the Rosenbach. And if you've not already donated or become a member, I invite you to do so. More about that on our mid-break. Thank you. Before we start tonight, Curtis, of course, I always have to tell people what am I drinking, and every episode features a Sher-locktail designed by our good friend and co-host, Mary Alcaro. You can find these recipes in the YouTube description for the episode. I also send the recipe out via email to everyone. If you register for the show, you can register at the Sherlock Mondays homepage at rosenbach.org. And tonight it is Pycroft's Hesitation, which is it's a gimlet with a little extra that Mary has come up with. Now her recipe, Curtis, called for sage leaves, and I had every intention of getting some fresh sage this weekend, and I did not. So I used fresh rosemary, and it's actually very tasty. I wasn't sure how the rosemary was going to turn out with the lime and a gimlet, and it works very well. And then she suggested we take some kind of gold sprinkles. And again, I don't have any. So what I have is I took some white sugar crystals, some big crystals for cake decorating, and I put a gold edible paint on them. So I'm gonna drop those in there. And there we go. You can't see them at all, but they're in there. I guarantee you there's gold in this hair drink.
Fool's gold.
Fool's gold. Yeah, sugar gold. That's going to quickly dissolve and be delicious. So the Mary has set this one up as the gimlet because they go to Birmingham. And Birmingham, apparently, in the 19th century, was heavily involved in the importation of limes from the West Indies. And lime juice was produced in Birmingham and then exported for the manufacturing of citric acid. So that works well for this drink and for this story, Pycroft's Hesitation.
A call out to Mary. She comes up with the wittiest and most delightful cocktails for this show, and the fact that she does it every week is amazing.
Every week, although I have to get next week's drink from her quickly because I got to send out an email tomorrow with it in it. So she's been doing great with them. I cannot wait to see what we're going to drink for Gloria Scott, which is next week. So Curtis, also, you may not know this, but Sherlock Mondays now has a poet laureate.
I did not know that.
One of our viewers, Claire Danes in New Zealand, Canterbury, New Zealand, Claire watches from, has been posted, and it's not Claire Danes, the actor. She even said that someone asked her that in the comments. So it's Claire Danes, the writer, or Claire Danes, the poet for us, has been writing these little ditties for each story, well, for some of the stories, and you can find them on the YouTube comments on our YouTube channel. And for Yellow Face, Yellow Mask. Was it Yellow Mask? Yellow Face. Yellow Face from last week. Uh, this is the poem. There was a young widow from Prairie whose conduct made husband most wary. But then challenged at last, she presented a past he wished neither to cast off nor bury. Little
Very
limerick for that one.
excellent limerick. My gosh.
Here's one that Claire wrote for Blue Carbuncle, and this was not a limerick. Speak roughly to the trembling thief that on your hearthrug wheezes. No petty crook deserves relief who priceless treasures seizes. I spoke severely to the thief who lost his prize to geeses. He'll err no more, it's my belief, and I'm not the police's.
That's great.
That's a
Very
really
good.
good one. So, Claire, thank you so much for writing these. Just put in the live chat that it's 1 p.m. Tuesday, tomorrow for Claire in New Zealand. So Claire watches the show from the future. On with our story, Curtis, on with Stockbroker's Clerk or
Yes.
Clark. Should we clerk it or Clark it today? Which do you want to do?
Well, Clark.
We'll Clark it. Okay. I'll try to remember Clark all day, all for the entire episode.
English pronunciation for us, I think.
It is. We shared a PDF of a facsimile of The Adventure of the Stockbroker's Clerk, as it was originally published in the March 1893 issue of the Strand magazine. You can download that on the Rosenbach's Sherlock Mondays page. And you were last on the show for Cardboard Box, Curtis, and I mentioned then how mundane a title Cardboard Box was, and then it's the grisly contents. And
Mm-hmm.
I think this story kind of winds up being like that in a sense, right?
Well, I guess. I mean, it's not a very inventive uh, title, and it's not a very mysterious title. It pretty much just puts it out there. It's like I think two or three from now is the resident patient. This is the stockbroker's clerk.
Yeah.
It's basically just saying what the main character is in this case. So it's not terribly intriguing as a title.
But by the end, we will get some grim happenings that I think are not hinted at in this title. Like, I mean, think of the way it started, studying Scarlet and, or even a scandal in Bohemia. It's got some kind of, mysteriousness about it, but that hints at what's going to scandal that could happen. And I don't know if anybody expected well, I mean, it's a mystery story, so you expect there could certainly be murder. But there's a grisly murder at the end, and or at least it's described in a grisly fashion, and a suicide attempt as well at the end of this story. And I think they are not hinted at all as it starts.
Yes.
Well, go ahead. Were you going to comment there?
No. I was just saying yes. I was
Oh, and this story begins with a little bit of, Watson bio about him buying a practice. Shortly after my marriage, I had bought a connection in the Paddington district. Old Mr. Farquhar, from whom I had purchased it, had at one time an excellent general practice, but his age and affliction of the nature of St. Vitus's dance, from which he suffered, had very much thinned it. Because of course he had this disease that with this nervous condition, and if he couldn't cure himself, why would you go to a doctor that couldn't cure himself? Physician heal thyself kind of attitude.
right.
Medice curate ipsum. I even pulled out the Latin for that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Well, I mean, especially with that. I mean, it was a disease that was hard to cover.
yeah.
So it was pretty natural, and then Watson wound up benefiting from it.
But he has confidence, he says, in his youth and energy that he could make the concern as flourishing as ever. this is probably something we mentioned on a previous, episode about the practice, is that in Watson's time, you would buy an entire practice. You would buy a doctor's, a portfolio of patients,
Right.
and take over their, residents usually. And that's what he has done. And another little, and well, we'll get a double reminder here of when this story is, but it's Watson talking about how young he is. And then in a little bit we'll get a shout out as Sherlock Holmes arrives as to when exactly this is. And is this the second story Holmes has come to Watson's house? Was it Boscombe
Well,
Valley?
Boscombe Valley, he came to his house, but he came even earlier than that, I think. Um, you're bringing it up. I wasn't prepared to look for that, but I think he comes even before Boscombe Valley once.
I think
So
so.
it's,
Yeah.
it's the early days, and he doesn't do it very often. Obviously, the way that Watson responds to him showing up, Watson is sitting at the end of a day going over his British medical journal when he hears Holmes's high, somewhat strident voice coming from the next room, and there he is. And uh, so Holmes starts his deductions about Watson's and so forth.
But
But
even before,
Watson at this point has not seen him that much. He's
no,
prepared. He's
yeah.
setting his own household and going through this process of getting his own medical practice. So he's been sort of busy.
And Holmes even and it's the social caller Holmes, at least in his first, greeting to him. I'm very delighted to see you. I trust that Mrs. Watson has entirely recovered from all the little excitements connected with our adventure of the sign of four. That
Which is another way of showing that this is an early case,
yeah.
is because obviously if he has to ask, then it's recent. So
And it's a nice little sign. It's a touch for the reader in that we're, um six, how many stories in are we now? 18 stories in now, and or even just in the Strand magazine, about 15 stories in or 16 stories in, and Doyle's reminding the reader of another time when they were both younger and had just met, and is really situating us as readers in that kind of time when they had don't know as much, not so much has happened yet. And Doyle usually doesn't care about chronology, as we all know, but it seems like he's being specific about his chronology in this beginning of this story.
yeah, I mean,
Doesn't
yeah, at least, but it's also laying out, uh, you know, pipe as they call it in the TV writer business, just filling in for people who might be picking up this story,
yeah.
reading Sherlock Holmes for the first time. This is Holmes, uh, Doyle's way of giving the new reader some information about what's come before.
And I love Holmes asking after his wife. That just seems like a touch that, we don't see enough of Holmes being social like that. And then Watson, of course, which we do see, is shaking him warmly by the hand. Watson's very touched that he has dropped by, um, and tells him he was looking over my old notes and classifying some of our past results. And of course, Holmes right away is, well, would you like to go on another case?
Well, but let's also remember the reason. I mean, Holmes may be social at the beginning of this, but we all know that he's there for one purpose: to
He's
get
coming for
Watson to come with him.
Yeah, he's
So
coming for a
it
reason.
isn't just he's stopping in to say hello and find out how Mary is doing. He's coming there in order to get Watson to come with him on this new case.
Uh-huh. Let's look at the picture of that from Paget. There's Paget's illustration, just because I love Holmes sitting in a rocking chair here. Um, Looking a little out of place in it with his top hat. He's just come in from, in his almost evening clothes here. Um, Sitting in this rocker that Sidney Paget has come up with for this illustration, a wicker rocker. Now he mentions a wicker chair that exists at Baker Street as well. And Doyle does. But this is at Watson's. And pretty young looking, I mean, fairly young looking, both of them.
Yeah.
There is another illustration that came a few years later, but it's the same scene and it's a French image. And it was Holmes stories. About 6 stories were published in a French magazine called Le Monde Moderne in 1904 and around that time period. So this one is from June 1904 when they did when they published the Stockbroker's Clark story, and it's Comus d'agent de change. So, and I was like, does that translate exactly? And I did a translate on Google, and it said it's the adventure of the stockbroker's clerk. So, a d'agent de change would be stockbroker's Clark, apparently. This is Holmes, I'm assuming, arriving with giant mutton chops, which I love to think the idea of Holmes and giant mutton chops. And apparently he's going to go on an adventure with what looks like Marcel Proust.
Yeah.
The chair there.
I mean, really, either even if you could stretch a point and say it could be the other one, neither of them look like Holmes or
No.
Watson. Come for that, but yeah, it's much more Proustian.
I mean, he's even got you look up pictures of Proust and there's like the little curl going on here,
Yeah.
the mustache, like a twirl. So there we go. So that would be a mashup, huh? Proust and Sherlock solving a crime. I don't know. But he's also put this rocking chair in here. I used to have one of these big wicker wheel chairs here in the house, but I wore it out. So, and a cigarette for Watson, and as he relaxes, although we never get that in the stories. We get Holmes smoking cigarettes a lot, but not Watson. Okay, enough of that picture. Time for another adventure, Sherlock says, as far as Birmingham. And Watson is, would wish nothing better for that. And then Holmes does a little bit of his, his Dr. Bell trick. Oh, I perceive you have been unwell lately. Summer colds are always a little trying. They And then he explains it, my dear fellow, you know my methods, and from your slippers, and then Watson, and then we have from Watson here, like all Holmes's reasoning, the thing seems simplicity itself when it was once explained.
Once it was explained, yes.
And Holmes says, I am afraid that I rather give myself away when I explain. Results without causes are much more impressive. And what's fascinating is the whole construction of this story is a lot like the Red-Headed League, right? The whole, con to get in, to steal something, to trick somebody out of a place so they can get in there and then steal something. And even that little bit, there's something like that. And it's when Holmes knows Jabez Wilson, when he visits him, has done manual labor, took snuff, was a Freemason, and had been in China. And then he explains the trick, and Wilson says, I thought at first you had done something clever, but I see that there was nothing in it at all. And Holmes takes a little, gets a little sniffy about that because, it's ruined the effect by commenting how ordinary it is. And even that detail at the beginning of this story, which I thought was unusual.
Although he doesn't wait for Watson to say anything. He goes through the
Yeah.
description of how he deduced that Watson had had a cold, but before Watson even has a chance to say anything, he says, "I'm afraid that I rather give myself away when I explain. Results without causes are much more impressive." And then he just moves on. You're ready to come to Birmingham then?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like he's been wanting to get going, and enough of this nonsense.
Let's get out of here.
Yep.
So, but Holmes can't resist. Let's do another deduction on the steps outside.
It struck me actually reading this that for this that you actually have almost almost a page of these deductions of Holmes's. First, the slippers, and then the steps outside leading up to the house. And it always has struck me, and today I was really looking at it because it's always struck me as being a little much because Watson has, they've already done this great description of the slippers and the fire, which feels like your typical Sherlock Holmes beginning of a story deduction about Watson. And then there's a break because Watson has to go tell Mary and write a note to his neighbor who's going to look after his practice. And then he meets him outside, and boom, you have a whole other thing which would have been perfectly fine on its own. And for the first time, it's always struck me that way, but for the first time, I had the feeling that maybe Doyle felt this story was a little light
Yeah.
and was adding this extra beat so to fill it in a little bit because they're both excellent, but you don't really need both of them.
No. No, I like that idea too because it is a story light on kind of what happens and
Yeah.
how quick. I didn't check the word count on it, but I have a feeling it might be a little short.
Well, I mean, it's not just the word count because, you then have to go through the whole description where Hall Pycroft tells the story.
Yeah.
They get into the train, which again is something that happens all the time. It just felt a little like, you know, more for effect than word count.
Well, they get into the cab. I agree with you entirely. And they get into the cab, and we meet Mr. Hall Pycroft, unusual name. I meant to look that up to see if that name actually exists. Had been common at all, used at all by people. And then Watson describes him. Well, he's young, well built, fresh complexion, frank, honest face with a slight crisp yellow mustache. And then he describes him as a smart young city man of the class who have been labeled cockneys. And usually when somebody is called Cockney, that's the sign that now we're going to have a little fun with this person. We're going to kind of make fun of them a little bit. We're going to use their, kind of accent where they'll be a little bit out of place. And Watson, though, is all over praising this man. These kind of young city guys who are from city neighborhoods with a particular accent are crack volunteer regiments and turn out to be fine athletes and sportsmen than any
Well,
body of men in these islands.
yeah, I think what he does is really interesting. He says that they've been labeled cockneys
Yeah,
with the sort of understanding that the accepted reality that cockney is sort of an insult, that people refer to cockneys in sort of a derogatory way. And he then goes on in the same sentence, he doesn't even put a period in, but give us our crack volunteer regiments and have turned out more fine athletes and sportsmen. And it's like, well, yes, they may be called cockneys, but look at all of the wonderful things they do, which in a weird way is sort of emphasizing the fact that it's kind of a derogatory term. And the thing that I was noticing in reading up on it a bit was that Cockneys um, were named for originally the River Thames had been known as the River Cockney. This I had never heard,
Hmm.
but that's where apparently it came from.
I didn't know that either, and I'm wondering if there are varying, reasons why they've come up with the word Cockney, but that's interesting
Yeah,
that it could have been the name for the Thames. I of course go to write the Pickwick Papers because the conception of Charles Dickens's Pickwick Papers is a bunch of Cockneys who are out making fools of themselves trying to play country sports. And that's the
right.
original conception that Dickens, of course, really changes and goes into greater detail than the original conception. But that idea that but this has been a kind of identifying label for a certain class of people for the Brits
Right.
who live within the city, have grown up in this city, all within the city boundaries.
Well, I'll tell you, one born within the sound of Bow Bells,
Hmm.
London. One, this is Brewer E. Cobham, from the Dictionary of Phrase and Fable. Defines Cockney as one born within the sound of Bow Bells, one possessing London peculiarities of speech, etc., one wholly ignorant of country sports, country life, farm animals, plants, and so on. And Camden is the one who says that the River Thames was once called the Cockney.
Hmm.
So that's what I came up with.
There we go. It reminds me of me. I'm a city kid. I mean, when people ask where I'm from, I'm not just from Philly. I'm from Albany, and I have an accent that identifies me as Philadelphia. That's pretty strong. And I think a lot of urban environments have this. I mean, a lot of places clearly have it, but urban environments tend to get, I think, frequently the pejorative added to it. But I like it. Well, Hall Pycroft is not only do we get the Holmes wants Pycroft to tell Watson, tell him the story, tell him to, so then he can listen to it. Holmes likes to hear, the what it, the story itself. And Holmes also says it may prove to have something in it or may prove to have nothing, but which at least presents those unusual and outre features. See, maybe he is with Marcel Proust here. Outre features which are as dear to you as they are to me. Again, outre. This is the fifth time that Holmes has used this word in the stories so far. He begins all the way back in Study in Scarlet using this word outre, and I am convinced that he has gotten it. Like, I am convinced that Doyle was reading Poe's Murders in the Rue Morgue, in which Dupin uses outre a couple times, and it just kind of stuck in his head, and it winds up coming out in the story of the detective who's partly modeled on Auguste Dupin. Strange details have significance. That's the whole idea of the outre, and they also make cases more interesting when they have outre details. Our young companion looked at me with a twinkle in his eye. I thought that was odd that that Pycroft has this, twinkle in his eye. This, it's the idea of him being what he call, not cockney, but the way he described the smart young city man. Really, ready to. I don't know. Is that he's ready? He's having fun with this in a sense, as well as he's not. He doesn't feel he's in danger. He just thinks
Oh
this is
no,
all
he doesn't feel like he's in danger, but
bark.
he's what happens after that sentence is the worst of the story is that I show myself up to be such a confounded fool.
Yeah,
He knows that it's funny. I mean, the story is that he fell for this. Unlike Jabez Wilson, this is somebody who really totally took the bait and realizes it, and realizes it's kind of humorous.
Yeah. Now Doyle doesn't try to do dialect spelling here,
No.
which is good, because that's often a disaster when people try that. But although Dickens can do it well, but he gives them all the slang. I used to have a billet, a nasty cropper, ripping good testimonial when the smash came. It was a perfect frost for a long time. So he's got all these little words that he's using that aren't necessary that they make sense in context, but they're clearly it's identifying him as this,
It's slang. It's
yeah,
Cockney slang.
this Cockney urban dweller.
Right.
And his story is that he's home and he's got a new job at Mawson and Williams, this big stockbroking firm, but he's only gotten the job by letter, so they've never met him, and no personal interview. But they write to him and say that he has the job provided that my appearance was satisfactory. The class reminder in this story that they're and I think that's the issue. It's they want to make sure he looks like a respectable young man in taking this job, not I don't know what. So not like, he's somebody that they would consider of lower class. Um, and now he tells the odd part, well, some of the odd stuff that happens. He was in his diggings, which is where he lives. I was sitting doing a smoke. I'm going to start using that now. I was doing a smoke that very evening when Arthur Pinner, financial agent, comes by. And then we get this anti-Semitic slur here that he says Pinner has a touch of the sheeny about his nose. That that he looks Jewish to him, but in a very negative way he's describing this.
Yeah.
And Doyle, has that. And I mean, I think we've had a couple instances of that in these stories. But unfortunately common for his time, and that those kind of descriptions show up. But what this Hall Pinner or Arthur Pinner offers has a job for him with the Franco Midland Hardware Company, which sounds like a con company to me. It sounds like something Mark Twain would come up with. Franco Midland Hardware Company Limited. And so the con begins. I like that this is a con story. That it's one of those long cons, right? Where somebody's, impersonations are made and offices are rented. And it sounds too good to be true. That they would give him this job. They're going to give him £500. The salary's £500 and 1%. And they have 134 branches in France, and not counting one in Brussels and one in San Remo, and Pycroft's never heard of it. And why would they choose him anyway? Just because somebody said so, and he's been offered. It's like it's a lot that he's been offered, but the kicker is that, oh, and I'll give you £100 right now, a note for £100 as a kind of down payment on your salary. How do you say no when you've been out of work for, however many, weeks or months he's been out of work now? And and so he's kind of taken, even though he's kind of, a little chill of doubt came over me, Pycroft says, that, he's got a safe job and this, pie in the sky jobs being offered to him. But he and then the kicker though is when Pinner says one or two small things, mere formalities, and this is the real reeling him in here that he has to write a little contract out. I am perfectly willing to act as business manager of the Franco Midland Hardware Company Limited at a minimum salary of £500, and then and then Pinner wants him to not contact Mawson's to deny the job, just to not show up, and that Pinner says, I'll tell him because I had a conversation and they said you were, that they had just picked you out of the gutter and won't leave us. And so this is the way that Pinner is painting Mawson's. So adding a little more incentive for Pycroft to not take the job with them. Again, a kind of like Red-Headed League, right? This is, it's not the some strange eccentric millionaire has created this job for you that you have to come and take, and it's a decent salary for just sitting around copying things. But here it's another con, but it's the same kind of story. They need to get him not away from a place this time. Well, yes, they have to get him away from the place. They have to get him out of where he should be working. So he goes to Birmingham, where they have their temporary offices, and meets somebody there who was very like the chap that I had seen the night before, the same figure and voice, but he was clean shaven and his hair was lighter. The brother looks just like him, and the offices are spare and dingy, just a couple of empty, dusty rooms, uncarpeted and uncurtained, and with two chairs and a table, a ledger, and a waste paper basket. So doesn't seem like this is the shining job that he has been offered. Would you be concerned at this point, Curtis? Like, oh no, I'm being taken for a ride?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, he had been told that they're temporary offices, and so that's one thing. But yeah, I mean, it certainly raises some doubts, I would think. Um, but I mean, if you put two and two together, which he's starting to do
Yes.
when he gets his assignment, um, to go, is this, but he's got the money, he's got the promise of more money, so
And
he's in
it's
for a penny, in for a pound.
Yeah. He says, on the one hand, I was definitely engaged and had £100 in my pocket. On the other, the look of the offices, the absence of name on the wall, and other of the points which would strike a businessman had left a bad impression as to the position of my employers. And then the job that he's given is again a lot like the busy work that Jabez Wilson has to write out the encyclopedia. Here he has to just go through catalogs and mark off all of the what is it, hardware dealers,
Yeah,
all the furniture shops in France. And oh no, that's the second time.
hardware.
The first one is the hardware sellers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so he's given this huge book that he has to go through. It's like, an old Yellow Pages or something, as near as I can tell, and to make this out. And this is where it gets very strange, because he he winds up working on it for days. And when you think about Jabez Wilson in Red-Headed League, you can sort of get it. It's the encyclopedia. It takes a long time and all this, but really, it takes, what is it, 3 or 4 days
Yeah.
for him to mark the hardware stores in Paris that would carry their. I mean, it's just weird.
And then he goes back and they say, do it again, this time with
Well,
furniture
that's the great thing is that he comes back and thinks, well, thank God that's done. And then they say, now go back and do the same thing for what is it?
The furniture shops, for they all sell
The
crockery.
furniture shops. Going back and doing it again. It's the what you would think is he would say, why didn't you tell me that in the first place? I would have marked both. Now he has to go back and start all over again.
Yeah. Um, and then his boss has great advice for him. Don't overwork yourself. Couple hours a day's music hall in the evening would do no harm after your labors. He's like telling him, God, make sure you goof off a little too.
Yeah.
So
Nudge, nudge. Yeah.
um, but while saying that, he laughs, and that's when Paul Pycroft notices the second tooth upon the left-hand side had been badly stuffed with gold. And I love this sentence here. You see that Sherlock Holmes rubbed his hands with delight. That's the little detail that Holmes loves, that Pycroft Hall has also noticed. And Holmes is like, oh, that's great. And apparently the the first brother that he had met had the exact tooth stuffed in an identical fashion. One of only those things altered, which might be changed by razor or wig, but I could not doubt that it was the same man. So he might the hair, no beard, but this has got to be the same guy now. And that's when it suddenly struck on me that what was dark to me might be very light to Mr. Sherlock Holmes. A reminder that, and I think we had this last week too with the yellow face story, in that people don't come to Sherlock with crimes. The police come to Sherlock with crimes. Regular people mostly come to Sherlock with, I don't understand what's going on right now. Yeah.
Mysterious things. Yeah, it's true.
Solve this weird thing that's going on in my life. And then, at least according to Watson, the ones that turn out to be interesting crimes, usually Watson winds up writing up, even though there are some that it's not quite a crime that has been occurred. But this one will turn out to be a crime, is in the works. Well, this is the conclusion of his story. And Holmes, then Sherlock Holmes cocked his eye at me, leaning back on the cushions with a pleased and yet critical face, like a connoisseur who had just taken his first sip of a Comet vintage. You have a note for Comet vintage there? It's one of those.
Yeah, actually, there is one. Of wine, the vintage is a particularly good year. Let's see, the standard work. It doesn't say anything about it except it's almost impossible for Come, I think probably how it's pronounced, not to have coincided with a great vintage. So
yes,
it's a very special bottle.
Well, it does mean a comet. It's that kind of thing where there are certain comet years when a certain comet was seen in the sky, and then they have said that, oh, the wine was particularly good that year. And
yeah,
so
of wine, the vintage is a particularly good year. Yeah.
So is a particularly this, Holmes is Holmes has just taken a sip of this exceptionally, unusual vintage. That's what this story is to him. I like that little detail about him that Watson notices. Well, let me take this moment before they head off to Birmingham to thank all of you for watching this episode. As a nonprofit organization, the Rosenbach Museum and Library depends on the generosity of friends and supporters like you to keep programs like this free and accessible to hundreds of fellow Sherlockians worldwide. I should change that to thousands of fellow Sherlockians worldwide as the viewership has grown for this show. I hope you will consider supporting the Rosenbach and Sherlock Mondays by donation, which you can do so at our website or by becoming a member. We have members all over the world now with these shows. A membership gives you free museum admission, discounts on programs and courses, and exclusive invitations to member-only events. It also gives you early access to program and course information, including many online programs that we have. You can learn more about how to become a member on our website, and you'll see that there are lots of interesting courses and programs going on there for the winter. The spring courses and programs will be released in not a I guess a couple weeks. I don't even know the time we release that. I'll have to find out. This Sherlock Mondays also has a Facebook group page that we have lots more Sherlockian info, news, links, conversation, and fun. I post there frequently, as do many of those who watch the show. And I love to hear from all of you. You can write me at epettit, E-P-E-T-T-I-T at rosenbach.org. I love to hear from our audience. Sometimes, Curtis, people send me things. And I had this really nice letter that I have to share with people from one of our viewers. And it is from Tiffany. And Tiffany writes, and this, nothing like getting a handwritten letter, right, Garnish? So she loves the show, how wonderful Sherlock Mondays and some of the other shows are. In many ways, they've helped me get through the last few years. Very excited about the Sherlock Holmes experience, one of my favorite authors of all time. I can't even remember a time when I didn't read Sherlock, and I've been passing the love on to my children. In fact, my favorite moment was in a McDonald's. I love this. Was in a McDonald's with my kids when traveling. My daughter was kindergarten and my son was fourth grade. And as we ate, we read out loud. We eventually gathered a crowd who were very engaged. It was lovely. So reading Sherlock aloud, and Tiffany has also sent me. Tiffany is an artist, and because I mentioned that I watch Doctor Who, I'm a big Who watcher. She had one time had made these. She had created cards, paintings, watercolors for all the doctors as an animal that she thought they would be, and she sent me the whole series. There you go. There's the fifth, Peter Davison. She's done all the way up to Matt Smith, who is a camel, of course, with his fez. His fezzes are cool, and hoping one day she can get back and finish them. But I'm absolutely,
That's impressive.
What a lovely gift. I can't wait to send these cards to some of my other Doctor Who friends. All right. So you can write to me. Please, you do not have to send me things. I do not need gifts. I love this. This is so wonderful. But feel free to write to me. Feel free to write to me an actual letter. That's always great to get. Or you can just email me, and that is just as good. All righty. Back to our story. I'm so tempted to go on a Doctor Who tangent, but I'm not.
That's not a good idea.
It's so easy though, especially after comets were mentioned. So there was a space reference there. So, but we won't do it. Where are we at here? Okay. So, they are. Oh, and then Holmes wants to know how they're going to be introduced to, how they want to go and meet his boss, and how can they manage that? And it's Pycroft who actually has the idea. He says, "You're two friends of mine who are in want of a billet, and what could be more natural than that I should bring you both round to the managing director." I like that he's come up with the plot here, the idea of how to get them in to meet him. And I bet you didn't notice this. I bet you no one notices this, but as I have to carefully read this, it says for Holmes, Watson writes, he began biting his nails and staring blankly out of the window. And I thought, I don't ever remember Holmes biting his nails, but also it's one of those moments where Holmes is doing like some serious thinking. And that's not the usual thing that happens. It's usually a pipe. It's usually, curled up in a chair. I thought that was odd. And I did a search, and he bites his nails in one other story later. It's the Bruce Partington plans. So this is the trivia question. You can all win on at something. Which stories did Holmes bite his fingernails? And it's Stockbroker's Clerk and Bruce Partington plans. So there we go. Now we all have that trivia in our heads. They get to the Birmingham, to the offices, and it is Pycroft tells him that the office is usually deserted up to the very hour that he's supposed to have an appointment. Another Holmes says that is suggestive. Another clue here, and then they see him. Well, there he is. But Pinner goes and Quicks buys a newspaper to the kid hawking newspapers, and then clutching it in his hand, he vanished through a doorway. And when they go into the office, Pinner looks up, and he's reading the newspaper at the table, and he has a face which bore such marks of grief and of something beyond grief, of a horror such as comes to few men in a lifetime. So a big surprise for them. And then they go through the whole thing that, these are my friends. They're looking for a job. Holmes says, I am an accountant. That could be a good question too. Good trivia question, right? What story does Holmes, suggest he's an accountant? And then he tells him to leave. He says, I now beg that you will go. For God's sakes, leave me to myself. So they can clearly see that Pinner is very upset, and he goes off into another room. He says, I will be entirely at your service in 3 minutes if I might trespass upon your patience so far. And then he gets up and goes out of the room. And Holmes says, is he giving us the slip? That's a very slangy way for Holmes to talk. I don't usually recall him saying that phrase before. Is he giving us the slip? But Pycroft says, no, that's just an inner room. There's no exit. And Watson thinks that, well, maybe he suspects we're detectives. And Holmes is like, no, he did not turn pale. He was pale when we entered the room. And then they hear the sound, a sharp rat-tat from the direction of the inner door. What the deuce is he knocking at his own door for? Cried the clerk. And then much louder came a rat-tat-tat, and then a low, gurgling, gargling sound, and a brisk drumming upon woodwork. And then Holmes sprang frantically across the room. They break the door down. The room's empty, and then there's a second door, and then behind that they find Pinner, who has hung himself from a hook behind the door with his own braces round his neck, his knees drawn up, his head hung at a dreadful angle to his body, and the clatter of his heels against the door made the noise which had broken in upon our conversation. The elastic bands which had disappeared between the livid creases of skin is what they take off of his necks, and they bring him down. That's a shocking moment in the story for me, Curtis.
Yeah.
I'm not expecting that at all.
Well, which is what that makes a good adventure story. It's certainly not expected.
Yeah. And this is an extra thing. This is where the story winds up differing a bit from Red-Headed League, and that we get that suspenseful wait for the final, catching of the criminal. And here it's split up because there's two criminals in two different cities, and in this one, instead of the suspenseful wait for something to happen, it's just thrust upon us. So, and Holmes kicking down the door like he's in a 70s cop show. I like that. Um, there's a picture of that too that Paget draws. Here it's later in the story. There they are. You can picture that 70s cop theme going on there. Bow, 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 and he knocks the door down and rushing into the room. But it's nothing but grimness in there that they find. Watson gets to like do something. Too many adventures. Watson is kind of sidelined while Holmes is, doing the things that need to be done. And it's nice when he consults him, asks him questions about, medical questions frequently. And in this case, Watson has to go in and, help this man who is nearly killed himself. His pulse was feeble and intermittent, and then Watson can tell that, but he's still alive, and he says it's been touch and go with him, but he'll live now. Open the window, hand me the water carafe. I don't know about you, Kurtz, but I'm really expecting him to say, "Quick, the brandy!" Like, where's the brandy? Right now.
Well,
But
where's the water? They're in an empty, unfurnished office, and suddenly there's a carafe with
suddenly
water.
there's a carafe in the corner.
So, yeah, whatever. Usually it's hand me the brandy, but
Yes. And the water, he's not going to drink it for God's sakes. No one drinks water. They throw it in his face. And then Watson raises and sinks his arms until he draws a long natural breath, which used to be the way that they would kind of resuscitate people by doing it. Almost like they're pumping him, like they're a bellows, because it kind of widens the chest and does that. And now it's changed now. It's the pressure on the chest to get the breath going, or to at least get the heart to beat. Um, um, it's he's going to be okay though. He has been saved. I am sorry there's no brandy, but there is none, and he's saved anyway. And Holmes, of course, says, "Oh well, Pycroft wants to call in the police, and or Holmes says, well, now we just have to call in the police, and Pycroft's like, I don't know what's going on, and Holmes says, all that is clear enough. Uh, you understand the rest then? I think that is fairly obvious. What do you say, Watson? Why does he even ask? Watson says, I must confess that I am out of my depths, said I. Now, Watson is capable and smart, and he's a doctor and knows things and all that. And I know that we're supposed to get set up with he helps us as the reader get set up that, like,
that's exactly what it is.
yeah,
There's
that
nothing
we're
else.
him.
He just needs to give Holmes his cue. That's all it is.
But must confess that I am out of my depths, though. It does really lead to that, like Watson is stupid. And he's not, but it's lines like that that don't help the image that winds up being the bumbling,
Yeah, I don't think they were worried about. I don't think Doyle was worried about that. That
No,
would. I don't think that was part of the equation.
no.
He was just writing a dialogue where one person is giving the other one the chance to talk. We have decided he's bumbling because Nigel Bruce made us think that he's bumbling. But at the time, he was just like every other person of his age and class.
Yeah.
And he wasn't a genius the way Holmes was. So this gives us a chance to hear what Holmes is thinking.
It is. It's Nigel Bruce in the Sherlock Holmes films. That's the first kind of,
That's when it
doddering
became
Watson, right?
bumbling. That
Yeah.
that's when it became bumbling.
Yeah.
Before then, it wasn't. It then became bumbling because of that.
Yeah.
I love Nigel Bruce, by the
Oh,
way,
yeah.
and I
And
love those movies. But that's where that came from.
what's the line? Somebody says if there is a bucket in the room, that Watson is surely going to put his foot in it at some point, you
Right.
know. But I don't think there wasn't a stage tradition of a Watson like that before then.
No, he was barely
Yeah.
there. He
Yeah.
was, in all of the stage productions in the early films, Watson was a non-entity.
Yeah. And then they become buddy pictures. So what's the first? Well, all right, there's a tangent. What's the buddy picture start? But this is certainly those films are certainly an early, uh, version of them. Watson's out of his depths, and now Holmes is going to explain the case and explain all the clues that we have seen all throughout here. Um, uh, the first, and he says, he says there's 2 points right off the bat. That the first was Pycroft had to write a declaration by which he entered the service of this preposterous company, um, and um, and that was, of course, to obtain a specimen of his handwriting, so someone could learn how to imitate his writing. And the second point was to that he should not resign his place at Mawson's, so someone could then go and take it and also be able to write like him. Um, Holmes says, suppose that someone turned up in your place who wrote a completely different hand from that in which you had applied for the vacancy. Of course, the game would have been up. So it is unusual, though, that there was never an interview with this apparently place that was a great stockbroker firm. Um, uh, but what I find interesting is that what doesn't get mentioned in this story, Curtis, is there must have been another one. They needed an inside man. Whether or not that inside man knew that this was going on, they needed the information to find out that this guy, Hall Pycroft, was hired by Mawson's and they had not seen him. So somehow the Pinner needed to get that information, and his accomplice needed to get that information from them. So there's somebody else involved that by the end of the story we don't hear about. There's a sequel. There were Holmes says there are evidently two of them in it. The other is impersonating you at the office. And then Pycroft shook his clenched hands in the air. Good Lord, he cried. Well, I have been fooled in this way. What has this other Hall Pycroft been doing at Mawson's? And they can't find out because they're closed. And then and then they hear a voice croak behind them. The paper. that it's Pinner who tells them, look at the paper. That's almost a Monty Python moment, him sitting in the corner here against the wall, the paper. And then they find out in the evening edition, the man was sitting up, blanched and ghastly, with returning reason in his eyes, and hands which rubbed nervously at the broad red band which had encircled his throat. And there's another nice illustration from Hadget here at the end of the story. There's Howell Pycroft with his shaking his fists. Have you ever done that in real life, Curtis? Have you ever shaken your fists in the air like, oh? I've never done it, so I have to do that one day. It's a very histrionic thing to do. Here they are looking at the paper when they get it, but this is Pinner against the wall here. This is a really nice illustration. I mean, the makeup of it, the three solving it at this table here, this poor forlorn figure sitting crouched on the floor behind them, the bare wooden boards, Holmes looking off at Pinner, the criminal victim now he has become, as they're looking at the newspaper. The paper, of course, yelled Holmes, idiot that I was. Yeah, I'm surprised Holmes didn't think of the paper. I imagine several first-time readers of the story were thinking, that paper seemed to, I mean, Holmes has already mentioned that he already knew something was going on, and Holmes, this is something that Holmes usually thinks of. But that's where the story is. The secret must lie there, and it is Crime in the City is the headlines. Murder at Mawson and Williams, gigantic attempted robbery, capture of the criminal. And as Holmes reads it, it is, and a new clerk named Hall Pycroft was engaged by the firm and used his new position to obtain moldings of various locks and a thorough knowledge of the position of the strong room and the safes. And uh, when someone was seen coming out of the building, a constable, Sergeant Tucson of the city police saw someone come out of the building with a carpet bag, and another constable comes in, Constable Pollock, and they, after a desperate resistance, they arrest him. And inside the bag is 100,000 pounds worth of American Railway bonds with a large amount of scrip in other mines and companies. This is a big score. This is much bigger than, I don't know if the what was the Redheaded League? Was it 30,000 uh Napoleons, but they're gold, so maybe they're worth more. Maybe that's a bigger score than this, but this is a pretty big score. Um, and they also find the body of the unfortunate watchman was found doubled up and thrust into the largest of the safes. The man's skull had been shattered by a blow from a poker delivered from behind. Now, this is where the story really takes another step, I think, Curtis, in that it's one thing to have the robbery. Like you don't need, well, you do need, because you need him to be, I don't know. The murder is almost gratuitous for this.
Unless the murder was the victim, the the person who they found in the safe was the third person that you're talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah,
That was how he got in, and he needed to kill him so he and his brother wouldn't have to share.
yeah. It's not that the watchman found him doing it. It's that the brothers decided, well, we're only gonna, or the other two
They'd
guys,
been
we're gonna,
working with him. They'd been, you know, it was the three of them working.
yeah. But it's unexpected. I mean, this story could exist without that, and he would have the same reaction. Oh no, my accomplice has been caught, and the game is up for us now that I'll be caught. But it's the added grim feature of the murder, I think, that changes
They're
the.
going to suffer for that. I mean, that their punishment will be significantly more than if they'd just been robbing the place.
And it changes the complexion of the story. I mean, I don't know. Is this? I can imagine this is the only story with a near attempted suicide, literally happening as you're reading it, an attempted suicide, and then a grisly murder right at the end of it. I don't think there's another one quite like that kind of double whammy right at the end that happens. And that really surprises me, especially for a story that's the stockbroker's clerk. And Hall Pycroft has a weird job, and hey, what's going on here? And then all of this stuff occurs at the end, for Doyle to really hit us with. Uh, I mean, you and I did the cardboard box together, and even in that story, Doyle seemed to have reservations about it. Is the only way I can describe it, because we don't know exactly why, but he pulled it from the book publication originally. Then he later published it in a
Yeah,
later edition.
very different though. This is very different. I mean, you don't that was torture and body parts being hacked off and sent to people, and I mean that was pretty extreme. This was a guy who got hit behind the head with a poker.
Well,
It's not exactly
I don't
specific.
know. his
level.
his skull had been shattered by a
Yeah,
blow from a poker, and
yeah, yeah.
then doubled up, like crunched him up and stuck
Oh,
him in a safe.
yeah,
It's,
you're right.
you know,
You're
it's
right. It's
it's
just
not pleasant. It's not a pleasant picture. You know what I mean? It's that kind of description of it. I'm not going to share it, but it's funny that the French illustration shows not that, but they show the hanging. They had no problem showing that someone hanging, but they don't have him like with the way Pinner hangs himself. He doubles his knees up because he's in a short space to do it. They don't have that. They just have him hanging there. But I thought that was unusual that they showed that. Um, but in the cardboard box, Paget, draws at least, the murderer about to strike the couple. And there's an illustration with the two ears on a board that Holmes is investigating. Um, it's a I'm thinking in terms of the stories and how they've come. Like that first bunch of stories, there are horrible things in them and there's scary things in them. And the second run of stories now, there's at least two stories here that are, I think, a bit more grisly than Doyle had begun to write them. And I wonder if that's him up in the ante, or as frequently happens, once you do murders, how do you make them more shocking? Right? In art, when in stories and narratives, when you're creating a succession of stories, you often may need to make some more gruesome down the line to continue that factor of there is danger here. Any thoughts on that?
No, it never really struck me.
Well, Holmes has a bit at the end here, which for me is him getting philosophic again, as he does occasionally in stories, but not that frequently. Um, and here it is human nature is a strange mixture, Watson. You see that even a villain and a murderer can inspire such affection that his brother turns to suicide when he learns that his neck is forfeited. And then, we have no choice of action, and then that's like a Pycroft, you go for the police. But that strange mixture here, the villain and a murderer can inspire such affection that his brother turns to suicide when he learns the neck is forwarded. It's not the same, and I agree with you that you and I were talking about this before. It's not the same as the ending of Cardboard Box, the kind of what object is served by this circle of misery and violence and fear. Um, and then that's a perennial problem in humans, that those kinds of things happen. That's what he says, talks about at the asks, he questions at the end of Cardboard Box. Here it's just a statement, right? That a villain and murderer can inspire affection, such affection that his brother turns to suicide when he learns that his neck is forfeited. But it's still a reminder. It's a reminder of the horrible things that, yeah, I don't know what's hitting me so hard about this card. Maybe it's the fact of it's not necessarily the we don't get a happy ending again. Um, one of the criminals has been caught, but it doesn't seem like it's justice that happens, but at what cost? And um, I don't think that's what Holmes is saying, but that's what's going on here. I don't know. Am I crazy, Curtis, to question this? Yes.
Well, I think I just disagree with the reading. To me, it's almost ironic, the line,
Oh.
because he's saying human nature is a strange mixture. You see that even a villain and murderer can inspire such affection. It's the affection part that his brother turns to suicide when he learns his neck is forfeit. That has always struck me as being kind of an ironic
Hmm.
on cowardly villains, that now that he knows that his neck is forfeit, he, kills himself or attempts to kill himself
Yeah.
to get out of it. So it never struck me as being particularly philosophical. It was more just a sort of ironic comment on these criminals.
That ironic observation as to what they will do now that they know that, yeah, my Pinner knows now that that he's done for
Yeah,
because there was a murder. It wasn't just a robbery.
right. Yeah, yeah. And of course, the irony is he would have been hung anyway. And what does he do? He tries to hang himself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you there. But even I mean, well, I mean and of course, obviously, the biggest difference is in Cardboard Box. It was that kind of jealousy and hatred that has this murder of someone that he still loves, and here it is, it's just robbery, and now they're caught, and somebody's been murdered, and he's trying to escape justice. But there's no escaping justice when Sherlock Holmes is called in to shed some light on the affair.
Right.
Maybe this is a happy ending. Well, Sherlockians, thank you for joining us for episode 20 of Sherlock Mondays. Curtis, thank you so much for coming back for this one. We'll have you next month. I think I still have to remind you of dates, but we'll have you at some point in March. We have Greek Interpreter episode 26 down, but we have to make sure that works for you.
Okay.
So, all righty.
Yes.
Well, on our next show, everyone, episode 21, Anastasia Klimchinskaya returns to talk with us about the very first case Sherlock Holmes ever solves when he was a student in college, The Adventure of the Gloria Scott. And this is an adventure narrated, almost the entire thing is narrated by Holmes. He's telling this story to Watson of this early case, first case he was ever on. Thanks to our chat, Mrs. Hudson, Brianna, for managing the live chat links. Thank you to the sponsor of Sherlock Mondays, Lisa Washington. We couldn't do these shows without the generous support of our patrons. You can support the Rosenbach through donation. Your support helps us create more programs like this and also care for our collections. You can also become a member. Membership gives you early access and discounts to programs and courses. You can find out more at our website, rosenbach.org. Let me again remind you to subscribe to this YouTube channel, to like these videos, and if you're listening to the podcast, to leave us a review. Thanks so much, Curtis. It's great to see you.
Thank you. See you next time.
Yes, sir. Everyone, I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library, where the game is a book. Thank you all. Bye-bye.